Rachel, tell me when you're recording.
Recording in progress.
Okay. All right. I'd like to welcome everyone. We have legislators and council staff and the administration, so we're grateful for everyone who could come. We'll do this is the Provo Municipal Council, where it's a joint meeting with the state legislators, and it's 5:30, it's 5:41, Tuesday, September 12th, 2023. So we will just do a roll call. If we can start with Brian, and everyone can just say their name going around.
George Hamday, Norm Thursday, Justin Harrison, Dixon Holmes,
Marsha Judkins,
Catrice McKay,
Mayor Capuzzi,
Bill Pepperoni,
Rachel Whipple,
Tyler Clancy, Bill Isaac Paxton.
All right. Okay, so all this is a public meeting. Only the presenters and those on the council may speak or ask questions. Unless otherwise invited by the chair, please wait to speak until called on by the council chair. When speaking, please be sure to use a microphone so that the record is clear and those attending virtually can hear you. We do have 3 microphones around, 2 there and 1 right here. Yeah, when you first use them, then you turn them on.
it just takes a second.
Please also be sure to limit side conversations as they interfere with the audio recording. If you need to have a side conversation, please step out of the community room. All right, so I know we as a council put together some items that we were interested in addressing with the legislators to see if you guys had any ideas at your level of things you could do to help with this. One thing that came up was a discussion regarding incentivizing individual home ownership. I know you guys had that big bill the last session that put money towards a home, but it was only new construction. And what was it, like $450 or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know I've gotten multiple emails about feedback as far as they're frustrated it has to be new construction. Either they want to live in a certain area that's not having building, or they're living in an existing home that they could buy, or those kinds of things. But so curious about that. I know that when we were at the conference this weekend, they mentioned that there is no interest at a legislative level to look at that, but we can get your guys' feedback on that. So just anything in regards to a big problem obviously in Provo is investors getting in the market and taking over homes that individual families could be purchasing. And there's a very limited quantity in Provo, and we're a really desirable place as far as people having kids here at school for 10, 15, 20 years, depending on, there's like a lot of draws, right? So any discussion on that is great. Norm.
Okay, so this was a discussion that the home buyer credit was a discussion that was had within and without the legislature as well. The challenge is that we're trying to do more than one thing at the same time, and so it ends up not being very pretty. The main goal is to increase the housing supply, because that's the tool that we need to be able to keep housing affordable. So it's housing affordability through building more homes. And so the idea was that if we could create an incentive to help more people buy homes, then it would allow builders to be able to build and sell more homes. Now, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of debate as to whether this would actually work, or whether it would just be a transfer or just a subsidy to home builders, or what it would actually do. And so my opinion was I was willing to give it a try and see what happened, but I'm not optimistic that this will actually solve any problems. I don't view this as actually something that's really going to work, and we can come back and say, oh, that was a great idea because now we did this. I don't think it's going to do much of anything to anyone. The amounts are small. The numbers will be small. I don't think it's going to move the needle on anything, but I think that's what happened. And so that's why it was tied to new construction, because it was linked back to the idea of affordable housing through increasing the supply. Yeah. So I agree that there is this other public policy goal that many of us have, which is to help people accumulate wealth through home ownership. And you just look at the data on that. Wealth accumulation is primarily driven through home ownership. So by the time people are in their 40s or 50s, if they are not homeowners by the time they're in their 40s or 50s, they have very little wealth compared to people who were able to get into a home, even just for 10 years. It just makes that much of a difference because of equity and other considerations. So yes, it is an important thing, and I don't know that we have come up with any solutions. I would not say that bill provided a solution at all. So I don't know.
Yeah, so when we've talked with the legislators or heard from the legislature in the past, it's a terrific priority to create or provide in many avenues more affordable housing. I think everyone sees that as an important value and priority. What's difficult, I think, for most cities is when the legislature is interested in tweaking or reducing or criticizing or scrutinizing impact fees. Because those fees have to come from somewhere, right? So if we're not taking them from impact fees, which are justified through various analyses, then we've got to take those fees from somewhere else in order to provide services that will serve these new citizens who are coming into these homes. And I think you all recognize this, but a change or any kind of constraints on impact fees don't necessarily mean that the home buyer gets passed on the savings. Right? So if we cut impact fees, there's not necessarily any guarantee that a developer will pass those savings on in any shape or form to a home buyer. So I just wanted to underline those 2 points, that we need impact fees, they are justified and audited, and that we would be interested in solutions that benefit home buyers. So.
Great point. We just did truth in taxation, and one thing that came up when I met with a assessor is that because the citizens have come to us with, hey, how can we get help on these things, right? So it was the elderly and veterans. There's a couple things that are done by the state in that regard. And one thing that came up was that those amounts are really small and they haven't been adjusted for the inflation and cost of housing and such now. But there would be a nice thing for those benefits to make a difference for people, because you need your houses to be under a certain value. The values are too low to help most people.
I think you're making a great point, and we actually tried in the House. It passed to raise those values with the circuit breaker for income, and it didn't get through the Senate. Okay. So I don't know if that's going to be proposed again or not. But did you want to say more about that?
Yeah, if I could. So what we did get through, which was not the circuit breaker. So the circuit breaker is that you just don't pay the taxes. It's like Shan said, the money has to come from somewhere. Mm-hmm. So if X% of the families don't have to pay property taxes, well, then the rest of everybody.
Well, I think it
more.
Was that it. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that it took, because I just looked it up the other day because I have a lot of people asking me about these, but it gives you a credit towards your taxes depending on your income, and it graduates, and right now you have to make below, I think, $35,000 to get any kind of a credit, even like $88 credit towards your tax bill, and it raised it to $50,000, and it's still not a great credit. It's like $100 and something credit, but so you're right though, there is a portion of property taxes that simply will not be paid.
Yep. And so what the Senate proposed, and that we actually did do. So part of this goes back to wealth accumulation. So a lot of the low income elderly people actually are not, they're money poor, but they're house rich. So their houses that they paid $30,000 for however many years ago are now worth $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. And so they could get reverse mortgages and other things to access that wealth. But then they say the same problem though is if their property tax bill is $1,500, when last year it was $1,200 or the year before it was $800, whatever it is, they're saying we can't absorb that increase. So what we did do was allow them to basically take a lien. So the county then can take a lien against the value, the interest or the equity in the home. And as long as that person stays living there, they can forego the property taxes. But if that house actually transfers in the future, then the county will go back and collect those taxes out of the sale of the property or the transfer of the property. So that's something that I know the Senate had been working on for a long time.
And that did pass?
That did pass. So people can do that now. So is it a perfect solution? No, but it does have so it allows them some relief from the immediate need to pay property taxes. And it doesn't create the need to have somebody else make up the difference. It's basically an interest-free loan. And I believe that there was a discussion with the counties because of that interest nature of this, that the state would hold the counties harmless for some period of time by making up for those interest losses. So that we're kind of spreading that across the state. So that is an option. I have no idea how that's been implemented in Utah County, or if it's up and running for the current tax year. So that will be something to be aware of and let people know that they can go down to the county and say, well, what are my options? I can't afford to pay my property taxes this year. What are my options? And they should have a new one this year.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
The biggest feedback I've heard is that people would like it if at a certain age they get frozen.
Right.
You know, if they could qualify for.
There's the California prop, whatever, some number.
Okay.
That keeps coming back. That the idea keeps coming back that at X age, your property tax amounts get frozen
If you qualify.
If you qualify, but it's the same question. Well, now what if property values quadruple over the next 10 years, and so now you're sitting on a $2 million house, but you qualified for a tax freeze? How do we still feel good about those people needing the tax break? And I don't know.
Yeah.
That is ultimately the policy question at the end of the day.
Okay. Any other questions about that subject from any counselors?
Did you want to talk about the investment? Like
Yes.
investors?
Sure. Yes.
I mean, you mentioned that.
Yeah.
So.
Love it too.
That's something that I've kind of tried to look at. And I would love to hear what you mean exactly, but like the large investors coming in and buying up homes and then fixing them up and then selling them for more, or renting them for more, or
These are some things I've heard from people, like even, limit the amount of rentals out of state investors can even have. They can have one or they can have two, or, I met with a guy the other day and he was like, why can't we just ban Californians, Oregons, and Washingtons from buying homes in Utah? You know what I mean? Like they're just the idea that, but I think the bigger issue is everything becoming rental stock and people wanting to buy homes to live in that are part of the community.
right. And so you hit on some interesting things that harken back to constitutional rights and property rights and crossing state lines and allowing people, you know what I mean? Like all of that stuff, which we have to be really careful with and
As we should.
is probably unconstitutional on its face. But there are levers that we can work with at the state level. For example, charging more property tax the more properties that you own. And there's always downsides to everything, right? So that's something that I know we've been talking about a little bit, but it's also very difficult to go there because a lot of people are investors in the state too. And where do you draw that line? And then a lot of times that higher increase in property tax just transfers over to an increase in rental costs too, right? They just pass that on to the renters. So it's tricky, but something I think we should be maybe looking at more aggressively are short-term rentals and helping cities with tools to combat short-term rentals. And I don't think that is Provo's problem necessarily a whole lot, but I know that in, like Washington County and other places that there's a flagrant violation of short-term rental policy. Anyway.
Thank you. George.
Yeah, we've been looking at that issue and our numbers are much lower, but there's still a concern that short-term rentals need to be looked at more carefully and regulated a little better. I had a question that's related to this. Travis and I were at a neighborhood meeting and we got into a sort of dueling statistics that we went offline after the meeting to try to solve. I had read that Envision Utah's reports, and I went back and found it in the 2019, they were saying that 80% plus of our growth in Utah Valley was going to come from local population numbers. And this only matters because sometimes there's this perception that all of it's being driven by Californians, or on the other hand, if Envision Utah's data is correct or its estimates are valid, a lot of that growth is actually internal. And I think it does at least change the conversation a little bit to say, are we providing houses for, those folks who are trying to move in on us, or are we providing them for our own children? Travis showed me the studies during COVID showed that Utah Valley's growth, I think it's 62% of the growth during COVID in the Valley was actually out of state. But what neither of us had an answer to is, what has COVID adjusted those estimates for the future growth of Utah Valley in any way? I mean, do we still anticipate that most of the growth in Utah Valley is coming from local population growth? I have to imagine that that's a pretty significant factor and always will be, and that there was an exceptional wave of in-migration from other states, but I don't know if suddenly Utah Valley's on the map in a way that it wasn't before. So I'm just wondering if anybody has an answer to that. I'm kind of curious.
Counselor Ellsworth, real quick.
Oh, yeah, maybe Marcia wants to take this one. Kemp C. Gardner Policy Institute has done demographic research. They have demographers on staff, and they have a report answering just that. So I can send it to you if you want. Well, I didn't get there. I just found the article. Utah's migrants in 2021 are not too dissimilar from the migrants in 2018. Between 25 to 30% of both in and out migrants were born in Utah. What has changed since? Yeah.
So I think, yeah. So even those that are coming from out of state, a lot of times they were born in state. And I think that we have to allow for that.
People coming back. Yeah. They're
We had
like
kids come
salmon
back,
coming
right?
back to their spawning grounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From COVID. So
I like it. I like, anyway, I think that's a cool feature of our culture, actually, is that there is that desire to come back. But anyway, sometimes the tone of outsiders versus insiders gets a little confusing to me, because I'm like, I don't know that we know who we're talking about here.
Okay, Tyler Clancy.
So to add context to the legislation about the owner occupied versus, investment companies owning, I spoke with a legislator from Missouri earlier this summer Missouri's been having the same discussion as the St. Louis metro grows significantly. There was a company that bought almost 80% of the condos in this, one municipality. And so the legislation in Missouri gave flexibility to cities to allow to have a certain percentage of neighborhoods be owner occupied and have those regulations. So it wasn't necessarily banning a company from owning X amount of properties. It was giving the flexibilities to the cities to have a little more strength in their zoning. The one thing I was curious about from the council perspective is I remember hearing some whispers about possibly a workforce housing credit in Provo, or some sort of building a workforce housing community. I was just curious where is that still in the pipeline, or is that still in more discussion mode?
It's in discussion mode. We're working on it.
Yes, so that is something we are looking at and hopefully planning to announce in the near future. And I think the focus would be a partnership, and then we were talking about some different ways to manage it. And we were thinking, what if we do public safety and focus on that? And then if the hospital wants to partner with a group, let them do for their nurses. If the school district would like to do some workforce housing, partner with the school board and let them put up some money for school teachers, but just kind of try and tap every single area. But I'm focused on our workforce for the employees of Provo at this point. It's okay. It's coming, right, Bill? We're working on it.
The Provo Housing Authority has a nonprofit arm that we would work through to get that done with all the deed restrictions and all those things that would need to be put in place. And they need the help of the council with zoning sometimes to do certain kinds of housing or, land possibly the city owns, or, like the school board owns land, they could do land and work with this nonprofit, and then they take care of the housing. So it's just, there's many things we could look at that we're interested in trying to do more of that, because that would be truly giving people a home at a lower price that we can't do otherwise. All right, next item. We're going to discuss landlord-tenant regulations. Do you want to comment on this, Rachel?
Yeah. Let's see. All right, we're on. As we've been looking at what we can do to respond to complaints that we get, mostly from tenants, but occasionally from landlords as well, because some tenants are terrible. We have found that as a council, we are almost entirely preempted by state law. There's nothing we can do. Our hands are effectively tied. And my perspective on this is colored by years of volunteering at the Family Justice Center, where we had people coming in who can't get an attorney. They're seeking legal advice, and they come to me with their rental agreement or an eviction notice, or even worse, they're coming with a judgment that has been entered against them, and their paycheck is being garnished for a security deposit overage that they didn't even know about. Right? Because the way it was set up, their last known address was the place that they got evicted from. They left, they assumed they just weren't getting a security deposit back. And then the landlord or the property manager goes to court, says, not only did they wipe out the whole security deposit, they did all of this damage, and they get a default judgment against them. And then miraculously, they're able to find them to garnish their bank account or their wages. It's incredibly convenient. But generally, when people would come in and talk to me and say, I've got this 3-day notice, what should I do? I'm like, well, these are your options under the law that you could fight it. But no, if you do that and you lose, you get treble damages, or your landlord gets treble damages against you. And so really, these are people with no resources. Their best option is just to vacate and to not fight, because they can't afford the risk of losing a fight, especially if they're coming to the free legal clinic. That's a hard thing, right? Because once someone has been evicted, it's much harder for them to find a new place. And if they've got a 3-day notice or, a 10-day notice, that's not enough time to find another place to live. And so you have people who are in very tenuous situations, couch surfing or going into homelessness. You have disruption for children in school. And we as a city can do nothing about this.
Do you have policy in mind, or?
Well, I think Norm has an idea.
Mine are more questions than solutions, because the problem is even worse. Because even if you're not evicted, if you're thinking of moving, the new landlord wants first and last month's rent and a security deposit. So that's basically 3 rent payments, sometimes more. And if you are living paycheck to paycheck and you're making your monthly rental payments, where do those other 2 months come from? Because you're thinking, well, I'm hoping to get my security deposit back, but these days you almost never do, which is kind of a weird kind of change in our culture and our societies, that almost all landlords now, the default position is that they're keeping your security deposit. And then you got to negotiate to get any part of that back. So you're not getting that back, but then you've got to figure out where to get the other month's rent from, because even those first and last month's rent, somehow the math just doesn't work, that you still end up not having a free month at the end, because most of the time they'll say, well, let's wait and see. And then they'll go after your last month's rent as an overage on your security deposit. So it's really complicated. One of the solutions that has been kicked around, but the landlords really hate, and I think it's a great idea, is that security deposits should be held in escrow They should always be held in a separate escrow account because it's not the landlord's money until it's the landlord's money. And the landlords don't want that because their business models now all treat security deposits as revenue. They collect that and they just spend it. And so one of the reasons why they don't want to give the money back, they've already spent it, they don't have it. And so they're like, well, even if we wanted to give all these security, we don't have the money because we've already spent it. So one thing that would maybe kind of just help, and it's a small step, but I think it's a step at least signaling that money is held in escrow on behalf of your tenants. And it doesn't have to be individual accounts, but it should be in an escrow account. And I think attorneys probably know how this works, so we can probably figure this out. And then in order for you to get that money, you have to take an additional step that's not currently in the law. Well, because currently in the law, you're supposed to send them a letter that says, here's the damages that we're claiming and here's why. And then you should be able to get access to that money. But that way, that would prevent them from just keeping the money. And if people never complain, because if you don't send them the letter and they don't complain, it's their money. You can't just spend it. So that's one little idea that maybe, that's something that's right up Rachel's alley to help us think about whether that would actually work.
Brian Jones actually has a comment on that.
Yeah, I was going to ask Brian if we could make having an escrow account a requirement to get a rental dwelling license.
In Provo City, just for the city. We'd have to look at the Fit Premises Act and make sure that we're not preempted on that, but that seems like the kind of thing that we might not be. I was just going to piggyback on Senator Thurston's idea and say that on an unrelated matter, I was looking at Florida law recently, and if I remember it accurately, I think that they not only require the escrow account, I think that they require that the security deposit and the last month's rent be kept in separate accounts, and they can't be used either one for the other purpose. Meaning you can't use the last month's rent for over security deposit overages, and you can't use the security deposit for somebody failing to pay their rent. If I remember correctly, so that's related to what you were talking about.
Marcia?
I don't know if you had more to say.
There will be more, but
Okay. No, this is something I've been working on the whole time I've been there. Our landlord rental things, and just this isn't going to be super helpful. It's always an uphill battle when we're talking about rental law, and because, well, landlords have a really strong lobby, and there's also a lot of legislators that are landlords, and like you said, you have to protect both sides, right? So a lot of times, something that's going to be helpful to renters can be harmful to landlords. All this stuff. So anyway, it's fraught. I will tell you, I have been in some amazing meetings, but if the Utah Rental Association, which is the landlord lobbying group, can actually be quite helpful. And they are who I work with a lot. And if there are questions or anything, if people contact you and need advice, help, whatever, I can forward those on to Paul Smith, who's the chair there or the director. And he has been really good to answer questions, sometimes in ways I don't appreciate or like, but he will answer questions, and he knows the law inside and out that has to do with rental housing. It's not super helpful, but it could be helpful. And then also there's a mediator. I would love to expand that program, but it's through United Way, their housing. And so anyway, that they can help, because honestly, it's best for the landlord if that tenant stays in that housing. It's best for the tenant if they can stay in that housing. It's best for everybody if that tenant can stay in housing. And so the mediators can work to try to accomplish that. And it doesn't always work, but also the housing advocates. And I might be telling you everything you already know, but there are many housing advocates. There's some with the Boys and Girls Club. There's some with United Way. There's some with Community Action. There's some with the Utah Housing Association, like all these different places. And they all have money to help keep somebody in their housing, but not forever, right? And I know that's not the ideal solution, because many times the things that have got them to that point aren't going to change in the next few months. And so it's just really, really difficult. But then we also, and once again, you might not already know this, but evictions, they can get expunged. And right now it's after 3 years if everything's all paid up. But I have another bill that I'm working with the Utah Rental Housing Association to change that to, and it's either 60 or 90 days after the eviction. So that's a lot quicker and will help people get into housing quicker, but we don't have a lot of housing for them to get into. So it's still really rough. I don't know. It's changing slowly, but it's difficult for sure. I sympathize and empathize, and I wish we had better answers for you.
The only one more thing that I was going to add real quickly is how vulnerable people are on when they're in a month-to-month contract. And even if you sign your original lease for 1 year, after a year, it automatically converts to month-to-month. And with that, if you do a complaint, issue a repair request or something, then because it's month-to-month, you can be terminated with just the amount of notice required for that. Which means you're in a precarious position. So a change that might be helpful would be to get rid of that automatic month-to-month status, to actually require people to sign new contracts or have that opportunity. Or the default would be that it would continue. When we lived in Belgium, their rental agreements standard were for 3, 6, or 9 years. It was very difficult to find someplace that we could live for 1 year. And you have to give notice like 2 months before your lease was ending that you were going to terminate it, or it would automatically be renewed, because this was a policy designed to keep stability in the cities, to keep renters there. I don't think we want to go that far, but if we can reduce the number of automatic month-to-months, we can give people a lot more housing stability.
Okay, so I can bring that up in our meetings. I see that. I wonder, there are problems with it because a lot of people don't want to go for another year, right? They do want to start month to month after because they're looking for a place that they know they're going to move or whatever. Those aren't things that can't be worked out, but anyway, I can bring that up and just see.
Okay. Thank you. All right. As a council, we've been looking over homeless stuff, and you'll pass this way, Bill. And we're going to take one of these. We offer a lot of services in Provo, right? And we have a food and care coalition and Candlelight Villas now, which are incredibly successful. They're very effective in what they do. And, a large part of our city is nonprofit and, offering these services to citizens. And we find it like it's a little bit frustrating that the state doesn't recognize us as doing anything for the homeless in regards to that we still have to pay money to the state and we don't get any money for our food and care or Candlelight Villas or other services that we do here from the state. So we're just curious about if it's recognized at all that what Provo does, because we get a lot of bad press on that, and I think it's unfair and not exactly showing the whole picture. Norm.
I hear this is my chance to clarify any rumors and understand what's really going. I keep hearing from people who qualify for housing assistance that there is a 3-year waiting list. Does that sound true to anybody here? And can somebody help me? Well, they say, because I'll talk to them and they'll say, look, I was able to get on Medicaid and WIC and a few other programs, but when I went to sign up for housing, they told me that there was a 3-year waiting list. I couldn't get any housing assistance for 3 years. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right, but I haven't been able to find. I think this would be a great place for me to find out what the truth is and what I can actually tell them. I was like, no, here's what you need to do, or here's how it works.
There is, I'm I'm on the board of the Provo Housing Authority, and there's a lot of stats on that. That's not the full story. So I will connect you with our new director, who's fantastic, and she can give you the rundown on that so that you can know how that works and where the holes are or where. But no, people normally there's people that were housing immediately.
Right.
So it's just more complicated as far as what the voucher is and the different programs. And sometimes they'll be on multiple programs and then they'll drop off and go onto one, they get into one, but she can give you more full vetting of that than I can.
But I think that's what's interesting is that I keep consistently hearing this from the people who are trying to get help. And I don't know what to tell them because I don't know the answer. I am very sure that that's not the right thing, that they're misunderstanding how things work. But I do it's sort of like, maybe it's just like urban legend, like, oh, don't even bother because there's a 3-year waiting list. And I was like, it doesn't make any sense because most people in 3 years won't need it anymore because they'll be participating in self-reliance programs that will help elevate their income. And in 3 years from now, the goal would be is that you don't need housing assistance. So what would be the point of having a 3-year waiting list?
Right.
It's like, I'm like, all right. So, okay. So we'll connect on that.
I'll connect you on that. Yeah.
Yep. Very good. Thank you.
I would like to.
Marcia? Oh, yes. Okay.
I would like to know also because, well, we can have an offline.
Yes. That was a good discussion.
I do know that and you're more recently on the board than I've been, but I know they've always had long waiting lists for all of their housing. So I'm not surprised to hear that some people are stuck. And I know one woman who was in a battered situation in her domestic violence in her home, and she had to wait 8 months to get emergency housing.
There's some,
So,
it depends on what there's all these different avenues.
Yeah.
So I know it's just more complicated than, is there a 3-month wait list for everything? No. But there's needs all over the place. And it's wonderful that Orem's now going to do another refuge, right?
And we have heard from, in the reports that we've had more recently from different entities in the city, that one of the areas where we are in a shortage is sort of middle range emergency housing. I mean, we're pretty good if you need a place to stay tonight or in the next week, but then if you need a place for 3 months, it's a little more complicated, or for a year. So that's also an area that I think we probably, as a city, and maybe there are statewide efforts as well, but could do more to look into that middle range, make sure that we've got that option available for people, because that is sometimes the key difference between perpetual vulnerability to being unhoused versus, time to rehabilitate, to get self-reliance, or to get therapy or whatever else a person needs to get in order to get themselves on their feet. But that takes some time that is not available to someone in an emergency situation.
And in regard, like, we have very successful things, right? Food and care in the refuge. And it's wonderful now the refuge is going to be duplicated in Orem. There's a great need for more rooms. But it's also a blessing that we're kind of spreading the services around, and they're not all 100% concentrated in Provo, which is hard to sustain completely and build some really needy neighborhoods that struggle because of, the dynamics of that. But like, if it'd be nice to know the state understood that we need to spread stuff around Lehigh, Springville. Marcia?
Oh, I have so many feelings about this. Something I've been looking at for a while, and I've been involved in and trying to figure out. And I think it is a fair assessment to say that the state does not see Utah County as doing enough for homelessness. I think it'd be fair to say I don't see it either. And I know all of these, I attend many meetings, and we have a lot of homeless people here. We have a lot of McKinney-Vento homelessness here. I don't know where we can say we do enough for homelessness. I don't know where we can say that, and so Provo City does a lot more, I think, than other communities in Utah County. 62%. But I think other cities are doing a terrible job. So that doesn't mean that Provo is doing a great job. Like, I see Utah County is very lacking in we have a lot of resources for maybe food or things like that. But for actual homelessness and people who are on the verge of homelessness, and I just feel like the municipalities themselves, it's very difficult. And hotel vouchers are not a solution. They just are not. I don't care how many we give out.
Right.
They're not a
We have 3
solution.
hotels that we're working on that they take in people immediately.
Yeah, but it's a
working on-
very tenuous situation, and it's
Yeah.
not. And if they're being given out by the LDS church, then if you've got partnerships, they can't stay together in a hotel, or you can't have, like, there's just things. And I mean, like I said, I could have such a long conversation about this with you, and I would love to. And I'll stop now.
I was just going to say, one of the things I worked on last session was we were able to fund a project to define these issues. One of the problems that I see personally is when someone says homelessness, we are all envisioning and talking about a different family, a different person. We know the vast majority of people who are defined as homeless in Utah, they last in that period of homelessness for about a month. However, out of that population, there's about 11% who are considered chronic homelessness. Those are the individuals we see who are unsheltered, who are, publicly homeless. Both of those families, both of those situations are equally important, but they take drastically different approaches to solve. So one of the things that I'm personally working on, that's a project, and I put a document on some of your desks to discuss some of the mental health work that we're doing, but is defining it. I believe that, if we're going to implement certain programs, and our goal is, and that's the other thing too, is to say, well, the state doesn't see Utah County doing a good job, or people don't see Provo doing a good job. What does that mean? And I think, it's one thing to say a narrative, but what are the results we want to see? Is doing a good job helping people make homelessness brief and rare, and is doing a good job on homelessness saying that there's 0 people who are homeless on the streets, then that's going to take something totally different. And so I think too, before we in a way, and obviously we have to walk and chew gum, we have to continue doing the things that we're doing, but one of the things is setting those strategic goals. I think ironically the state has done a terrible job of setting those goals. Every year the state kind of ham hocks together, okay, well, this is what we'll do for homelessness. We can check that box on our thing. But what are our strategic goals? What are our 30-year goals? And how can we define that? So that's something that I'm working on that I think is really important to say, housing. It's a 3-year wait list. Well, someone might be saying, it's going to take me 3 years to get my own apartment for Provo housing by myself, carte blanche. But there might be rapid rehousing grants available. There might be other opportunities that, housing in and of itself, that umbrella, that's much more broad. And so I think while we have these discussions, and it's really important to bring that lived experience, we definitely have to have the data and our data metrics for the goals behind us to bring context to these conversations. So a year from now, if we come back and then we could say, well, here's our goals, here's where we measured, and here's where we improved, or where we need to continue to improve.
Love that. It's great.
Just follow up on that real quick. One of the things that I have noticed is that yes, we oftentimes let the policy for the 11% drive the whole policy. And while they are important, like Tyler says, they need a different approach. For the 89%, the approach is more of the holistic, get you to a state of independence mindset. So yes, I understand that maybe right now you're like, in our neighborhood, we have a mom leaving an abusive situation, 7 kids under the age of 12. And how is she supposed to make this work, especially if dad's not going to help out with that? But we can make that work. Turns out that she's highly educated, has great job skills, and within a month or two could be making $70,000, $80,000 a year. And that now can work, right? If she can figure out childcare and schools and a few other things, it's not an intractable problem at that point. But you gotta help, just continue to help people holistically say, okay, what do you need? Okay, you need medical, you need food, you need housing, you need all of these things. You need childcare, you need education. But the idea is that within some amount of time, most people can figure it out. But a lot of the people who are living in tents or camps or under bridges, they have an entirely different issue going on that is not that. It's not an intelligent person with a well-functioning mind that's just hit a hard bump in the road.
Right.
That's not the situation.
And in light of that, there's a lot of mental illness, right? Has there been talk at the state as far as, because we have the mental hospital here, but they lack beds, they lack money, it's a huge issue where they get put on the street just because they need another bed, but they're not ready. And I've also heard from our police department that it's a huge, and from Wasatch Mental Health, that the state changed the law such that you can't do any, no matter where they're at on the spectrum, you can't do any forcing of medication. And they say that that's created a whole nother issue for them at the state mental hospital, where they could sometimes get people on and make them realize, oh, my life's improving, and see that difference, but they can't get that anymore because they're not allowed to force them to take medication. It has to be they have to choose to take the medication.
I'm just gonna make a general comment and a question. I don't know where that Salt Lake or legislative perception comes from that Provo or Utah County is not doing a good job. I don't know if that's just the Salt Lake condescension because they've got such a major issue. Well, so my question is, where does that come from and what is it based on? I mean, we have some baseline statistics, right? I mean, Provo, if anything, we feel like we're doing a hugely disproportionate share of the load here in Utah County. I think we've got the statistics to back that up. If Representative Clancy asked if we could get some baseline statistics, we have those, don't we? And so we were happy to provide those to you to give you a sense of what we are doing. And there are certainly areas where we can improve. But I think we just need to make it data-based instead of perception-based.
I think part of, to Provo's credit, like Marcia said, Provo is doing more than the rest of Utah County. And you're pushing the elephant up the hill by yourselves. If the other communities around you would also do as great a job as Provo is doing, you would be even greater. And so your ability to be truly great is sort of limited by the fact that you're surrounded by some communities that don't really take it that seriously. But I think Provo, more than Salt Lake City for sure, is making an effort. If we're going to give points for effort, Provo's got to be one of the top cities in the state for effort on homelessness. Results, we can look at the data and see, but in terms of what I view in terms of perception, but recognizing that you are in part of a Utah County environment where that same effort is not shared.
I just want to circle back to that mental health question that Councilman McKay discussed. So if you look at this report, so I was asked to lead a task force by our Judiciary Committee about the intercept between mental health, severe and persistent mental illness, and homelessness, because there is an overlap. Two of the things that will start to develop here, we've had our working group for a couple months, and some of the stakeholders you can see at the front of that page there. It's quite a diverse group that doesn't all agree on many issues, but two of the things that you'll start to see develop is one is looking at our capacity. I'm sitting next to Councilwoman Whipple here, who discussed, the state hospital can't even hire caseworkers right now. So we could change the law, and I think we will to help people get into those services, but we do need to adequately fund those. We do need to invest in that mental health infrastructure. And I think for too long, it's been siloed into, well, that's mental health. Well, that's homelessness. That's intergenerational poverty. That's affordable housing. And I think what we're starting to see is more and more of these intersections. So one of the things Miami has in Dade County is it's called crisis response centers. It's a little different than the state hospital, and it's different than our Wasatch Receiving Center. Right now, the receiving center, we could bring someone there. A police officer could bring someone there who's in a crisis, but that person could say, I don't want to go. And unless they are imminent danger to the life of themselves or others, sometimes all you can do is walk away and say, well, I don't want to go too far because I'll probably be back here tonight. That's unacceptable. And I think the state needs to take responsibility for, throwing the baby out with the bathwater a little bit with some of these laws that we pushed. The other thing that's a very interesting, I think it'll be a good fix that we'll see here, is a little bit of judicial overlap. So people with severe and persistent mental illness are very commonly justice involved, as they say, whether it's for something minor like trespassing, or it's something where maybe they're a burglary or something that rises to the level. A lot of times when they come to a judge, they will be identified as mentally incompetent to stand trial. Well, you might think that if they're deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial, then they're going to be diverted to services. However, it's a completely different process because it's civil, and a criminal judge currently cannot make that distinction. So what other states have done and what we're looking to do in Utah is deputizing those judges to serve for our brothers and sisters, our neighbors who are severe and persistently mentally ill. Sometimes that's where we can get them, is during these criminal proceedings, because they might go elsewhere after the trial, say, hey, come here in 2 weeks for your evaluation. Whereas if the judge with the correct expert testimony and identification can actually mandate, in lieu of jail time or whatever, a time at a rehab facility or a place where they can bring that mental competency back to a stable level. And so I think that's something too that you'll see develop. But I'm more than happy to offline answer any other questions about this working group. We're finding some key points.
Didn't we pass that Abbott's bill this last session?
So Abbott's bill was just for criminal.
Okay, so you're saying that we're going to extend it now to civil.
Right. We're going to allow the judges to have, I guess, a broader option for their sentencing guidelines. That could be civil.
Okay.
Toolkit.
One thing that came out as we were having all of our social groups do presentations about homeless services and everything is there were some gaps that became clear. We do have the overnight vouchers. That's good for an overnight crisis, but we really don't have that kind of 1 to 3 month housing where somebody could have a room, someplace that's safe and secure and consistent so that they're able to, go through the process to get resources, to apply for new housing, I love this idea of expunging an eviction. Like if you could do that within 60 days and you're able to stay in a non-congregate shelter for 90 days, you would be able to get that eviction expunged and apply for new housing. But we need to have that period because that will help the vast majority of people who enter this homelessness, right? So if we can give them a place to stay for 1, 2, or 3 months, that's enough time for them to be on their feet and get that next place. Because if you're living in your car for that time and just showering at the gym or, gas station, restrooms, or whatever it is, you don't have the capacity to jump through all of the hoops for applying for jobs, applying for new apartments. And so if we could get help to get a non-congregate shelter in Utah County, that is the biggest gap that we've identified through all of our informational presentations.
You talked with Heather Hogue about this because...
Oh, she's great.
Yeah, because there was an opportunity for this a year ago. And all they needed was $300,000 and they had the rest of the funding in place and they couldn't get any entity to give them that money.
That didn't come to the council. They didn't ask us for that.
Sitting here about it because I talked to them.
Yeah, they may have talked to someone
in the county. They were trying to get it. But you're right. It's siloed, right? And so it's hard to.
Yeah, the money's in different locations and who gets to decide when the money is spent, especially when it's a short time frame, like being able to buy a motel or something like that. I don't know how we solve that, but that's what I've seen is the biggest gap that we have, because we do have good support services, but if you're not in a position to take advantage of them because you're so unstable, they aren't as effective as they could be.
Thank you. Tyler has sort of broached this, but we're wondering what interim committee topics are applicable to Provo City that you guys are working on in your committees. Let's see.
Just closing
Yeah.
Yeah. So the committees that I'm serving on this interim are business and labor, revenue and taxation, and then education appropriations. I have not seen any issues yet on any of those three committees that I would say directly impact any city, let alone Provo in particular. But I will be watching. I will let you know. So those are the sorts of I'll be interested to hear what you all have to say, because I'm not on. I don't think any of us are on any of the same committees, are we? So,
Tyler, is there more you want to add?
So the judiciary. Oh, sorry. The judiciary committee work that was mostly focusing on homelessness and mental health. I had to stretch because I was trying to find something. I didn't want to just say nothing, but I guess I'm on the education committee, and one of the things we're working on, I'm working on a bill about school lunch. One of the biggest things we've seen is that with inflation on the rise, a price for a reasonably priced meal has become significantly more expensive for just your average family. We want to help give Provo some backup, especially we've talked to some of our food pantries and such, and they're feeling that squeeze. And so we think the data shows that school lunch is a place where we can make an impact. We invest as a state an incredible amount into public education. But I think it's kind of silly if we said, well, we're going to spend X billion dollars on education, but you guys get the textbooks for yourselves. And if you can't do it, oh well. And we're starting to see with outcomes, especially with a lot of the learning gaps that we've seen the past couple of years, is that these school meals can make a difference. I imagine if we had this same meeting and someone came in and said, hey guys, we're going to push for 4 more hours, and there was no dinner or anything, we'd probably have a hard time paying attention. And it's the same thing for our kids here in Provo. And so we don't want to undo the work that our religious and civic and community organizations are doing, rather just build on that and supplement that. So it's a 2-part bill. One is going to it's going to be called a school lunch debt trust fund, and maximize all of those private donations that are already flowing in with a state match to be able to distribute that, so that kids, when they can walk at graduation, if they weren't able to pay off the school debt balance. Provo's already done a great job with the stigma, but there are other places across the state. And then the second is just indexing that free and reduced lunch price to align with inflation. The numbers haven't been adjusted for several years. And then the final piece is called a community eligibility. And so if a family here in Provo signs up for Provo housing, or if they are on Medicaid, or if they're already on food stamps at home, they should be enrolled in these programs that we're already investing in. So making sure we're using that taxpayer money effectively. So I had to kind of stretch, and it's not Provo only, but I do think it will have a tremendous impact as we have many, many families here in Provo.
Yeah, a lot of Title I schools.
Yeah, a lot of Title I schools and just a lot of kids.
Yeah.
So hopefully it makes a positive impact.
Thank you. Marcia.
Okay, so I'm on revenue and taxation, and we've talked a lot about property tax, and I know that there's been some property tax issues that have been here in Provo, and Utah County. I met with Mr. Roan. We met with the county assessor, and anyway, so if you wanted to go back and look at our last meeting, that I think was August 9th, look at the agenda. They have audio links. You can look at all of the different things. There was some really cool stuff that came up in the meeting. Did you want to say something?
One of the things that was an eye opener to me that you may be interested in, certain hospitals who claim to be nonprofit may not be entitled to as much property tax relief as they think they are. Because the way that the law is written is that a property must be exclusively used for charitable purposes. And it would be hard for anybody to say that the medical center is exclusively used for charitable purposes. Shriners Hospital, yes. Intermountain Medical Center in Murray, definitely not. There's plenty of non-charitable function going on there. And so that's one of the things that the assessors and the state tax commission have been looking at that as well. So for example, if a church buys a vacant property, they should be paying property tax on it until it's a church, until it's being used, as a non. So that's something that we've been kind of asking those questions. We had that was our last meeting where there were some of those questions being asked about. Well, how is this supposed to work? So you might want to touch base with the county assessor and others just to kind of express your opinion that maybe that there are some properties out there that aren't being used exclusively for charitable purposes that should be taxed more than they're being currently taxed. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yes, super fun stuff going on. Anyway, and I'm on Health and Human Services, and we haven't really, we haven't really had bills percolate up yet, So I have my bill that when we get to that part, I'll talk about.
Okay, well, that's the next part. So any bills applicable to Provo City that you are seeing in the upcoming legislative sessions, even not ones per se you're working on, but ones that you're aware of? Marcia, you have the mic already.
Okay, and a lot of times, most of the time, we're not aware of bills until you are, because they just, like my bills are private, everybody's bills are private, right? Until they're not during the session. But the bill that I'm working on kind of goes along with what we've been talking about, and it's a way to create I don't even know how to explain it because it's not drafted yet, but I'm working on it a long time. Create a position in the county and it's not to really, well, it's to make counties more accountable for what they are doing to increase social determinants of health. And so we've talked about that, right? Where a disproportionate amount of what we're doing here falls on Provo City, but it's hard to get buy-in at different levels of elected officials to actually make a change or to do something. So I'm just looking at how can Norm's looked at this, intergenerational poverty, and how do we help families with a human-centered approach come out? And I'm kind of like taking up where Norm left off. He got some really great money for that, but I don't know how it's being spent. But I want to provide accountability for those things at a county, like at MAG, but someone, I don't know. And then they're accountable to the state level, but it would be local solutions for local problems.
Could I ask a question about that? Yes. This came up in a recent discussion. I'm trying to remember when, but the Utah County government does not have a housing branch of their own government. And I don't know if that's something that, we know that could potentially be helpful to us, and not only in terms of managing our own housing stock, but having support from the county to get other cities working on these problems together, rather than always feeling like we're going out on our own, right? But if the county doesn't have any jurisdiction, doesn't have any data, nobody's looking, nobody knows what the housing stock in the county is, and this is the county that's going to grow the fastest in the state, or one of the fastest anyway. We've got to be on top of this, and we've got to have multiple eyes on it. So I don't know if that's also something that you've contemplated.
Yeah, I think that, and this is a little bit different, I guess. But I think that where Wayne Niederhauser is, the housing czar or whatever, I think that one of the issues with their program, with his program, which he is amazing, is that there is an accountability at the county level too, right? Like he's doing the whole state thing, but it's hard to get local. I would like to see more local control, more local accountability, more local buy-in for all the things that are happening. And so this would be kind of looking at all of that. And this person that would be at the county level would be using best practices. And we have all these social services. It wouldn't be adding social services. We have all these social services. It would be looking at prevention practices and how do we take down the silos of all this so that everything can work together so that we can actually have that human-centered approach for these families that are and we just passed a bill that schools, no longer use the SHARP survey, but they can go in and it's disaggregated data where they can see what kids are having behavioral issues or anything like that. And if we can utilize that and surround those families with whatever they need, we'll be saving ourselves a lot of problems down the road as those families just disintegrate as those kids get older. So anyway, I don't know. We'll see where it goes.
So Marcia mentioned the funding. So we were able to get some funding last year through the TANF program for each county to create a resource coordinator. So Weber County so they recognize that all these resources out there to help families in poverty. Yep. And so they pulled families in. The typical family that they're working with average is 17 different entities to provide support to each family. And usually it doesn't work because if you need 17 and you're getting 16, it just doesn't work. So if you need 17, you got to get all 17 or you're not making progress. So what they do, or what we've allocated the funding for, is counties to hire what we're calling resource coordinators or resource coaches to help those families that are eligible to make sure that they have contacts with all of the programs that they need to get themselves to the next step. And their success rate was phenomenal. It was over 90% within a year were able to get above the poverty level within a year. And within 3 years, I think 80% were able to get to a point of not needing any public services. Yeah, they were basically off, quote unquote, off welfare, however you want to define that. So that's one of the things that we'll be watching to see how Utah County addresses that. And hopefully they will get their share of the funding and move forward. But I was just kind of trying to look at my list of bills because I have forgotten them. But elections issues, that is something that does affect cities because you do elections as well. We are looking at some things that have to do with election security. We got to go over to Denver, had a great time, got to tour the Denver City County Elections Office and some of the things that they do there for their processing. And I was shocked. One of the things that they do, because part of with election security is public confidence that the elections, it makes sense to people. And one of the things that they have found in Colorado that doesn't make sense to people is that you can't know on election night who the winner was. And so Colorado has taken some specific steps so that you can announce a winner by the next morning and say, this is the person who won. Because what happens in Salt Lake County now is that you don't even know how many votes haven't been counted. They'll like, well, this is who is ahead right now, but we've only counted 20% of the votes. And now 3 days later, all of a sudden, there's 10,000 more ballots that have to be counted than there were on election day. And that you're just chasing a moving target. People don't find that convincing in terms of having a confidence election. So Colorado, or at least Denver County, has their policy is all ballots must be in hand by 7 p.m. on election day. Any ballot that arrives into their hands after 7 p.m. election day doesn't get counted. And I thought that's got to be like incredibly problematic in a city like Denver, which is probably leans liberal maybe. And I asked them, like, well, how does that play? And they said, no, yes, we understand that on the one hand that might be a problem, but on the other hand, we can announce a winner by midnight on almost every election. And so I said, well, what about the people who worry about their vote not getting counted? And they said, well, we have on the other side of this just made it easier and easier and easier for people to voting early, drop boxes all over the place. And so the concern about, well, if I drop it in the mail and it gets there late, I guess my vote didn't count. They don't have hardly anybody sending their ballots in the mail anymore. The mail-in ballots has just gone to almost zero because people are using those drop boxes. because then people know for sure I got my ballot in on time. I don't have to worry about the US postal system to do their job anymore. So that's something that we're looking at to see if that might be something, but would be a pair bill, which will say we're going to go with in hand by 8 p.m. on election night because Utah's polls are open to 8. But on the other side of that, to do some things to make sure that more votes, more ballots can get turned in and get counted. And I think what we're looking at maybe having that kind of that balancing piece be curing, because we're still hearing a lot of concerns about the people's ballots don't get counted, not because they weren't received on time, but because it's a subjective process for determining if the signature matches or switches. I don't know if you have heard of this. So 2 ballots come into the household, and now people don't know which ballot goes in which envelope. So mom's ballot gets in dad's envelope and dad's ballot gets in mom's envelope. Well, those wouldn't get counted. Those are because the ballot has to match the envelope. And so when those things come in, they can check to make sure that those get cured so that more ballots get counted. So anyway, something to keep your eyes on. They start counting as soon as they get them. So as they don't announce the results, but as ballots are received, they are processed through their tabulating machines. And that's kept in a secure system that nobody has access to until after the elections close. And so they, whatever they get on election day, they just process all of those that evening. And they have automated machines. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Utah County is doing the same thing. So the only thing that we're not doing is that we don't have a line in the sand. Well, we have a line in the sand, but it's like so far out. Yeah, it's like I think it's just 2 weeks after the election day, they can still come in and get counted. And so we're always just kind of like, well, we don't know. We don't know how many ballots are out there. We don't really know. And if it's a close election, we really don't know. And we're just waiting and waiting and waiting. So, but they said that since they've done this, they're able to announce almost every election a winner by midnight of election day. I thought it was really cool. A lot of fun. So I'm not looking at it. The problem has
The trial period.
Yeah, so the trial period has come, and I believe that is set to expire. So there's a question as to whether to extend the trial period. There were enough issues with those elections that I don't know if it's going to get extended or not. And interestingly enough, because you mentioned the Republicans, well, now who's fighting against ranked choice voting? The Republicans.
It's divided.
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy thing. And the reason the logs that get thrown on the fire, because now you have the Alaska ranked choice voting for their congressional election. There were 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, and the Democrat won. And so they're blaming that on ranked choice voting. Like that's instead of actually blaming it on the fact that they didn't get a good candidate and campaign for them, but they're blaming it on that. And there are others out there. I don't know. So I don't know. I don't know if the pilot's going to get extended or not. So it's well, and then you have, of course, then we had the primary, was it Lehigh? Yeah, but they counted them wrong. Yeah, which doesn't help the cause. So they apparently they thought that they could choose how to count the ballots, and so somebody came up with this really clever, different way of counting ranked choice voting, which was not consistent with the state law, and so they're having to figure out how to deal with that. So there's that. Brian's loving this.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes. Tyler, did you?
I was just curious, is there anything that the council or the city is a priority in looking ahead? I know it's early, it's not really, but.
I got a quick topic that we talked about, Rachel and I in a meeting just earlier today, but and Keith was there, about charging stations throughout the county. Our discussion was about the fact that maybe the city government's role is limited in terms of how much we want to get involved in promoting more charging stations in Provo. Maybe we've done enough, and will the private market kind of fill in? But I'm curious to know at the state level if there's some ambition to try to incentivize the infrastructure, especially for fast charging stations. There's more of the level 2s now in Provo, but they're not as helpful to a lot of travelers than it would be to have more fast charging stations. And I don't know whether we just wait for the private sector to kind of catch up, or if there's something that at the state level you're doing to.
I have old information, but at least it's information. So last year I was on Transportation Interim. UDOT has a master plan for putting those in place. And it was a question of who is going to pay for it and how they're going to get funded, how they're going to get built and maintained. But you're exactly right, because most people who have a fully electric vehicle charge it at home, and then they make sure that they're back home before they need to get charged it again, which creates the quote unquote road trip problem.
There's hardly anything in Provo for people
who are on a road trip. Yeah. And so that's the issue that UDOT is worried about. It's along the I-15 corridor, creating an infrastructure so you could actually go to Vegas and come back. That's their master plan.
Okay, Bill Fillmore had a question.
Yeah, let me throw out something that I'm not hearing anybody talk about just for fun. It's a Parks and Recreation issue. At the end of Center Street is the only access in the state to Utah Lake, public access. And it's flat out ugly. And it discourages usage. And I mean, wholly apart from algae blooms and whatever else. Mayor Curtis took the initiative a few years back to put together a rejuvenation plan. I mean, maybe you saw schematics. The idea was to enhance its utility as well as its aesthetic beauty. And it was a great plan, didn't go anywhere. And I know the mayor also has some interest in that. Is there any appetite at all at the state level to doing something about the marina, perhaps including giving Provo, which has a vested interest in doing it right, in a great Parks and Rec department, to give us a long-term management contract for the marina and to fund it, to give us the money to do it right? Because right now it's the greatest underused natural resource in the state, and the marina is so benighted. Is there any possible?
We have an estimate on, was it 30? 90. There's an Parks and Rec estimated that there's 90 million amount of work that has not been done on it, that, past work not being done, upkeep, maintenance.
Neglected for decades, but it's such a marvelous resource. And if we had a subsidy from the state and the management contract, we've got arguably the country's best Parks and Rec department. We'd love to take a shot at it.
Can I add something real quick? I think this is the first public discussion that the city council has had on Utah Lake, and I haven't seen any formal analysis. So I would just say this is the opinion of Councilor Fillmore, and there just hasn't been any public discussion amongst the council on a formal policy decision. Just
sure, fair enough, no problem. I mean, the point is it's been percolating for a long time, but we haven't seen any real initiative. And just be interested if you have an appetite for taking a hard look at it.
Thank you. I had an opportunity to talk with Joel Ferry this weekend, who's the director of the Department of Natural Resources, and we had about an hour and a half plus discussion about Utah Lake. And I mentioned, and I didn't say Provo City, but I do know of other conservancies and other private organizations that have those same concerns that all of us have, that this is a jewel of Utah County that's underutilized, and specifically talking about the lakefront. And they want to invest money, but because of the ways that it's written right now, they can donate broadly to the Department of Natural Resources, but there's no, I guess, promise that it would go to Utah Lake, much less would they have control over it. So the Utah Lake itself, being a sovereign water body, cannot and will not be sold to anyone. It will stay with the state of Utah. Yeah. That's a good, yeah. Yeah. The water itself, so the Utah Lake State Park will stay within the state of Utah. But I do believe, and I have a bill file open right now to give flexibility to local entities. Once we have that vision, there is a Utah Lake Council. The ULA is working on a 50-year, 30-year, and a 10-year plan, but allowing for community organizations to be more direct with their investment into Utah Lake so that we can see more tangible results rather than just this is for Utah Lake, please. So to be determined.
Last thought, not about Utah Lake, unless you want to stick with Utah Lake. But
No, I was just going to say the Utah Lake Authority also has taxing authority that we passed, that if that might be, anyway, just want to throw that out.
yeah, I guess final plea would be just to see the legislators participating with the council or attending a council meeting. We'd love to see you there, and we know that there's a lot of preemption and land use and private property rights laws that come up every session. And if you're able to see how those transpire from the planning commission to the council to the next council meeting, I think that would be educational. I think it would serve our community and be mutually beneficial if you were to attend multiple council meetings. And I know you have no shortage of meetings, but we'd love to see you there. We'd love to have you witness that process and understand what our concerns are and how we legislate land use.
Very short, Rachel.
Daylight savings.
Oh my gosh.
We can actually answer that.
Okay, to answer. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
I just asked you about it like 20 years ago.
And he turned it over to me, unbeknownst. I had no idea what it was going to turn into. But honestly, Utah has done everything they can to take care of that question, and it's all up to the federal government. So we have enough states that surround us that if the federal government passed the bill, because we said if 5 states, was it 5? 5 states said that they would go to daylight saving time, and the federal government said we could go to daylight saving time, we will automatically go to daylight saving time year round. And so 5 states have done that. It's just the federal government hasn't. So there's nothing we can do.
What are the 5 states?
It's more than 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Idaho, Colorado. Yeah. Yeah.
So if the federal government allows us to, that entire block would all go daylight saving time year round.
Be awesome.
Which would make it make sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Be great.
I haven't heard.
Yeah, they're sovereign, they could do.
Well, because right now,
You know, there's some states that have different
Yeah.
counties and different times.
Okay,
Yeah, when you go to Arizona, it's already.
go ahead. Isaac.
Thank you. Just want to, on the Utah Lake, I just want to say the mayor really advanced this idea of taking over Utah Lake State Park and addressing that. And I just want to acknowledge, being loyal to those who aren't present. The director of the state parks program had some extra funding at the end of last year. And I think because of the pressure and the question, took all the excess, it was a couple $1 million, and said, I'm going to put that to the Utah Lake State Park. Want to say we appreciate that. And then the local director there is doing everything he can to try to do what he can with the budget to try to make improvements. So just, they may watch this, and I just want to say thank you that they're scrambling and trying. Do I still totally support the big vision of it'd be amazing if Provo could take it? Yes, but just wanted to add that little context. Thanks.
Thanks, Isaac. All right, well, we want to thank everyone for coming, and I think I need to adjourn. If there's no objection, we will now adjourn the Provo Municipal Council joint meeting with state legislators by unanimous consent.
My consent.
Recording stopped.
What? Oh, the city heard about